In simplicity, people say, what would I do in the moment while I'm trying to communicate with the government? And there are simple, honest things you can say. One thing I would let them know is that I have no public claim or title. And in fact, I would hand them this document stating the fact that I'm forbidden to claim legal title because that would be a trespass. Okay, then I would tell them who I am, which would be a Christian, because Christ died for the other side of this. People may not see this, but that's why it was so imperative in English law that they would actually deem your given name to be a Christian name. We've dumbed it down over time to be forename and just given name, but in reality, in English law, at least for those that have been governed by English law and where their countries originate from being governed by English law, they only looked at your first name as a Christian name because he died for that. That's what separates the jurisdictions between truth and fiction, because that event happened. It happened in history, and because his execution as a king, there's a sovereignty in an event, and your future is based on the event. We call that post natus. You can look that up. I'll do a video on it to refresh that. I did it in the past. And that's what the whole purpose of the AD is for. It's because it's reflecting and giving honor and praise to that event for the purpose of what it brought, which was salvation. It canceled out all debt. So when we're looking at this subject matter of partake or participate, when we just talked about this is a non-participation document. Okay, and the fact was, because a child could never be entered into a contract, this could never be used down a direction to say that you were a participator. This is more like an off-the-record document that's not official. Okay, it's not for official claiming use. People they're trying to be an official out there. Those surnames are offices for those that are elected into official capacity by election and then appointed into those positions. Just as an officer on the road has the use of his surname in the public at that point, and he enforces tax and fees because he has that. That's why generally he's referred to mainly by his last name. The situation of those who are not under oath, well, they're assuming that they have official position, but they're not. So the majority of people would not be in official office use of that last name. They don't see it. One is public, one is private. If you've not been elected into the public, you've just assumed to be there, and therefore you're trespassing. And of course, what could they only offer you but a counterfeit bond, a counterfeit token of value to pacify you with your thought that under your own assumption that you're authorizing yourself. And that's why when you fill out those request forms to be known as, say, a Canadian or an American, generally it'll say that you authorized the procedure to get these documents. Okay, so we have to kind of take a little bit of a simplistic look at this and not make it complicated as the lawyers do. The lawyers will just have walls full of books that lead nowhere because it's a scam when something's that complicated. It's simple. I've done a lot of breakdown in the videos. You may think it seems complicated, but the message that was in there is not complicated. So we want to just basically break this down to, are you a partaker, a participator? Now, where do we get these words, partake, participate? Well, if we look back to the book of Colossians, okay, and we go to Colossians, and we've read this before, so I'm just going to bring you to Colossians 2. We look at Colossians 2, and I like reading out of the New American Standard for that reason, because Colossians 2:13 to 15 is much more easy to understand, but it's the beginning in verse 14, which I find is a better translation than the King James on this subject, because it says in the King James, blotted out the handwriting of the ordinances. This clearly just says having canceled out the certificate of debt. So symbolically, when we're carrying this and using this and operating with it and getting other IDs that are used that are derivatives of this birth certificate, you're carrying a certificate of debt. And therefore, that would make sense for people who participate in the legal. They're operating in debt. They're not operating as they're with Christ as the creditor. They want to play the debtor. So therefore, the legal system, of course, is going to operate a certificate of debt that you actually are acting as a surety for. How else would it work? Now, if I'm in free grace, this is canceled. Very simple. Why did they write that in there in that manner? Because it was more simplistic than the translation that was in the King James. I have a little problem at times with the King James Version because it is very legalistic, but sometimes not as well translated. And this having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. So he canceled it like a ledger with an invoice. It's canceled once it's nailed. And so it's done. So the debt part is gone. But those who deny the Messiah and Christ's salvation, the free grace, the gift, they basically have to operate something that would have a consortium or a collective audience of people who are going to walk away from that, who haven't accepted it. So, of course, you're going to run around with a title that says you're a debtor. This is not rocket science. We just really have to start reading a little bit more carefully and seeing that there is only two sides. So if you want to be a legal debtor, well, then you would walk around suretying this certificate, and it would seem like it is there in place. We know that the only time they cancel this generally is when, you actually really do physically stop being the surety and die. And then they issue the next one, which is the death certificate. But in the situation we know that when you've come to spirituality, this would not even exist because there'd be no point you suretying something like this as an instrument, because you wouldn't want to be known as a legal debtor. And legal is opposite to grace because it's reflecting earning salvation versus basically free grace, which would be the opposite as a gift. And you can't earn that according to Scripture. It's something that cannot be paid for. So when we go to the book of Revelation, which is important on this subject matter, because Revelation 18, Revelation is like the disclosure. If I say I'm going to give you a revelation, I'm giving you disclosure. In Revelation 18, verse 4, it says, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive of her plagues.'" Now, it uses the word participate in the New American Standard. In the King James, it says partake. A partaker is a shareholder, or at least trying to be a shareholder, wants to take a share in something. So therefore, if they're taking a share, they are basically in liability and responsibility with it. If you're not a sharer, a non-participant, so we've been talking about non-participation, and why that's what we showed, that you have an elective choice between being a participator in the legal or not being a participator. Christ died for the non-participator, who's the peaceful one. The one who's participating is bearing arms to participate. That's why they give you a legal surname, arms name, to show that you're armed. If I'm on the other side, I'm not unarmed, and the 1828 Noah Webster's Dictionary defined unarmed as a man is born unarmed. So you're not born with a surname. The surname is assumed and taken on. So if we don't want to be a partaker or participator, well, then we have to make a choice. And now we're saying, well, how do I do that? But in the meantime, while you're still in this moment where you haven't maybe communicated, at least now you understand what you would want to say to someone who's in the public. And you may have to make some changes, in the immediate, that you're not making yourself a hypocritical target. Because if you're in there heavily participating, this could be a big journey for you because of the fact that you've been caught up in the illusion that you do have something. You've accumulated riches, wealth, and that's not in the cards for spirituality. That's for people deceived into believing in such craziness. So again, we're just looking at the word partake. You're either a partaker or a non-partaker. So if you're in share, you hold the debt in their legal world. You go down with the debt, just like a common share. Okay, when the common shares basically fail, the whole ship goes down on that corporation. And this ship of Satan, his citizenships worldwide are about to collapse due to prophetic understanding from Genesis, where the seed of the woman would crush the seed of the serpent in the head. I call it almost like the overhead, because he killed the overhead, he canceled out the overhead. It's not by chance that they put the surname overhead on these documents. So you really don't have overhead, but when you don't take the time to actually look at what the scriptures are saying and what the words mean, you're going to be lost and confused. So let's take the time to do that. Our lives are at stake.